So one thing I do know about you is that you love acronyms in your PowerPoints and your writings. I see acronyms all over the place. So obviously, presence is not just a word, it is probably something that you are using as a tool to describe varied concepts. So can you describe to us what presence actually means?
Let me give some credit where the word came from in terms of an idea is from the work of Peter Senge and his colleagues. They wrote a book called Presence. And I was familiar with it. It's been out for quite some time. But I was trying to think of a name to give to this new thing that I wanted to create. And I was still able to exercise. I was swimming and I was in the pool, and the words just came to me that we could use presence and it would be an acronym. Each one of the letters would have important concepts associated with it. And they just came really easily. It wasn't very hard. It just kind of happens. I think it was from the other side of my brain.
Okay, so tell us about what these letters mean.
The P stands for partnership and power, because those issues are so critically important to address with people who have experienced trauma, because it's fundamentally about the abuse of power. The R stands for reverence and restoration. And that was my recognition that in my previous work, the existential, philosophical, spiritual aspects of this important work were more implicit, and I wanted an opportunity for people to really talk about what does that mean? What does reverence mean? And I think it's so critical now because of what's happening to our environment and the way we're treating other people, that the word reverence is critically important, to have an attitude towards all living things. And then restoration, there's so much restoration that needs to occur. I think the movement that has been occurring more recently around racial justice is really about how do we restore people's sense of wholeness when people of color have been exposed to microaggressions for many, many, many years that really we haven't fully dealt with. It's been a progress in my lifetime, but we've got a long way to go yet. So the idea of how do you do that? How do you restore that sense of being whole to our African American citizens, to our Native American citizens, to all people who have experienced those kinds of oppressions? How do we do that? The E stands for emotional wisdom and empathy. So the idea of emotional intelligence has been around for quite some time. Combining that really with empathy and what empathy really means, because that's what has become so lacking in our current environment, is empathy for what other people go through, for what it's like to be a child, for what it's like to be a woman, for what it's like to be a person of color, for what it's like just to be a human being. The S is for safety and social responsibility. And I've talked for a long time about the dimensions of safety that include physical, psychological, social, and moral safety. We've added to that the idea of cultural safety, which was a concept that I really learned about working with some Native Canadian folks who shared that that's what was the terminology being used in Canada and New Zealand and Australia to emphasize how important it is that each one of us understands our own culture and stops making judgments about other people's culture. The what am I up to? Oh, E, the second E is about embodiment and enactment. And that's to capture all of the knowledge we now have about how symptoms, often the symptoms related to trauma, are really the embodied communication that people are expressing to try to get help. And that behavior is really about cries for help. And it's a completely different way of understanding what really has gone wrong in human nature and how to address the problems. If we address somebody's cry for help in a punitive way, how in the world are they going to heal? So it's really, it encompasses all of that. The N is for nature and nurture. And that's that historical, long-standing conflict between, oh, are people born this way? Is it their genes? Is it their biology? Or is it what's happened to people as they've developed and matured? And the ACEs study has given us so much knowledge about, wow, what happens if you're really hurt when you're a child? And that it isn't really nature or nurture, it's both. They interact with each other, and we have to understand all of that. The C then is about culture and complexity. How culture, all dimensions of culture for all of us, all of the social determinants of health and ill health affect us in very complex ways. And it's an exploration of this newer science that we have about complex adaptive living systems. And it's a completely different way of understanding the world, very different from what we're all laboring with still, which is a machine model of reality, which just doesn't make sense when it comes to individual people or families or systems like organizations or all of our institutions. And the E is for emergence and evolution. It's where is it going? What's going to come out of the times we live in combination with everything that we've experienced in the past and who we are as a species? Can we still evolve? Evolution hasn't stopped. So until all life is over, evolution continues. So I'm going to believe and hope that human evolution is going to continue as well. And I want everybody to be thinking about that. What does the future look like? We've got an abundance of apocalyptic, horrible images of what the future looks like. In fact, the only media-given image of a positive future, getting past where we are now and thriving, is Star Trek, which of course I'm a real Trekkie, as a result of that, because it's the only one that's been really presented widely for us. So what could the future look like? We've got to start using this God-given imagination that we have, this amazing thing that is characteristic of being a human being, and that, as far as we know, only human beings have, to imagine and then consciously and deliberately move to a future that we actually want to live in, or our children and grandchildren want to live in. And right now that is sorely absent. So that E is to challenge organizations to really think about, so what do you want to be? What do you want to become? What do you want to see happen as individuals and as whole groups of institutions? What's the point of what you're doing? And is what you're doing now serving that future, or is it interfering? So the presence is meant to be that kind of an overall, overarching, organizing framework for all of that.